Hi, welcome. It feels to me that this week has been the fall return to school for many, to more intense work schedules for others, to a sense that the summer is really over, despite the temperatures or the bright sunlight to the contrary. I know that I always greeted that end with particular wistfulness, bordering on sadness, that something very precious had been lost until it comes again in about 9 months. I love the changes of autumn as well, with its special beauty, surprises of temperature, and another kind of natural being outside. But I move into autumn slowly. I continue to hold on to the vestiges of summer. This week, I had 4 experiences that, in retrospect, seemed to be united by a similar theme. I visited Minneapolis to help my daughter with childcare. And at one point, we talked about her sermon for Rosh Hashanah, the sermon that she is working on. I finished reading a book entitled Why We Are So Polarized by Ezra Klein. I came across an article in the Washington Post entitled 8 Ways to Feel Less Anxious About Things Beyond Your Control by licensed clinical social worker Leslie Alderman. And I, like so many others in this country and around the world, was caught up in the news and traditions of the British monarchy with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. In brief, my daughter is trying to help her congregants with the wisdom and guidance of Jewish tradition, help them find some kind of solace, comfort, a sense of coherence, of stability, and even security in a world that seems unusually uncertain, insecure, fragile, and changeable. Ezra Klein's book also tries to find coherence, but his quest is to uncover a rational explanation for the seeming political aberrations of our time. It is a complex and brilliant book that is exceedingly well-researched and data supported, the thesis of which is that what is happening now is not a departure or an aberration, but emerges from all that has come before. And whether we were watching or not, was moving toward this very conclusion. He tries to remove the negative connotations from the words polarize or polarized, and then affirms that, in fact, we are polarized and are likely to remain so for the foreseeable future and beyond. He illustrates and explains that once we have settled into certain identity groups, which humanity seems to be hardwired to do for a whole host of socioeconomic, geographic, vocational, spiritual, and psychological reasons, we become entrenched in our identities. In order to maintain our chosen identity, against assault or upset of any kind, we will rationalize and manipulate any information, data, scientific evidence, or empirical evidence that contradicts our way of thinking about the world and our predisposed beliefs about the nature of the world and our place in it. In other words, once we have chosen an identity, a side, if you will, it is almost impossible to move anyone out of that place, out of those perceptions associated with that identity. While not particularly hopeful, although he did offer some suggestions for lessening the severity of our polarized society, I found it very helpful to have a framework in which to understand much of what seems irrational, counterproductive, and counter to our best interests in the current behavior of all of us, really. Finally, Leslie Alderman describes most poignantly the state of mind in which many of her patients are finding themselves and in which they are suffering. The very title of her article speaks volumes. 8 ways to feel less anxious about things beyond your control. She coins the phrase, hope fatigue, as the latest mental health challenge facing mental health professionals, as she describes. To an unusual degree, people are weary. During the spring of 2020, just as the pandemic started, the question my patients asked was, when do you think things will go back to normal? Now, no one talks to me about a return to normal. There's an unspoken recognition that the chaos we are experiencing might be with us for a long time. Patients who had been concerned about national and world events and visibly frightened during the pandemic now seem exhausted. The murder of George Floyd was horrific, and mass shootings are increasingly common. Now it feels like we are all in a relentless game of whack-a-mole, but in this case, the rodents are existential threats. I'm noticing that many of my patients are experiencing a deficit of optimism and are overwhelmed about important issues that are beyond their control. I'm calling it hope fatigue. People are tired of hoping that the pandemic will end, that the Ukraine war will be over, that mass shootings can be controlled, and that our government can address these pressing crises. 2 in 10 Americans said they trusted the government in Washington to do what is right just about always, or most of the time, in a 2022 Pew Research Center poll. Pandemic anxiety is making us sleepless, forgetful, and angry. And then she offers suggestions for coping, many of which, interestingly, are part of our meditative practice. Thus, I liked the article. Aside from one more point, aside from the American fascination with the British monarchy, to which I confess, I found myself wondering what it is about that monarchy that evokes such loyalty and deference that Britons are willing to wait in line for upwards of 30 hours to pay their respects to their queen. I think there is a common thread here, but before I attempt to pull these disparate experiences together, let us take our first break to breathe. I'd like to do so by sharing with you some of the 8 tips for coping with our current anxiety that are offered by the social worker, Leslie Alderman. So let us take our meditative postures, finding a chair that is comfortable but allows us to be attentive, planting our feet firmly on this ground, sitting with our heads, with the feeling that our heads are being pulled up to the heavens, if you like, allowing our hands to rest in our laps, allowing our gaze to soften or our eyes to close, and to start at the top with our inventory, trying to release that anxiety that we carry with us. Its expression is in our bodies. There's no place else for us to put it rather. And the thoughts that we have related to our anxiety, even though we think we carry them in our minds, manifest themselves all over us. So let's release or soften the very scalps on our heads and try to wiggle our ears and take a yawn if it happens. Let us release our foreheads. You might even rub out the wrinkles with our fingertips. Let us soften our jaws and roll our necks. Or whatever it is that you do that helps you to release those muscles that hold our necks in place, but can do so with enormous tension. Some people just let their heads drop forward or back. And we can lift our shoulders, scrunch them up, 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 and let them drop. And then flap our arms and our elbows and our forearms, wiggle our fingers, and move inside to release our digestive tracts, our tummies, our waists, our hips, and our legs. Our legs that carry the weight of us, but also the weight of our concerns, of our anxieties and our stresses. Loosen them, loosen our knees and our calves, our ankles, twirling them, raising our feet up off the ground and up and down, wiggling our toes. And let us take that first break to breathe, filling all the spaces we've just softened or released. Oh, that does feel good. It's a different kind of breath than the ones we're accustomed to taking all day long that we pay no attention to. But by paying attention to it, we place ourselves right here, right now, in this space and no other. So let us fill up fully, completely, comfortably. Hold on to it a bit. And then let it go. And let us continue doing that while I share with you that Alderman offers steps to refocus our anxiety. Dwelling on issues that seem unfixable can lead to an anxious paralysis. But there's hope, she says. Just because you can't fix an issue doesn't mean that you should ignore it, said Paul Slovic, a professor of psychology at the University of Oregon, who has been studying the psychology of risk and decision-making for over 60 years. We are not helpless, he says. In the face of that statement, this is some of the advice that Alderman gives to her patients. Take a break from the news. Doom scrolling can be addictive and amplify the tragic nature of events. I advise patients who are feeling depressed by the headlines to read the news just once a day, turn off alerts on their phone, and if possible, check social media sparingly. We breathe in. And we breathe out. Take care of yourself. I tell my patients, you have to be in good fighting shape to cope with the current turbulence. That means boosting your resilience by taking care of your nervous system. Sleep well, eat well, exercise wisely, and engaging in life-affirming activities. like focus on the present. Get in the habit of anchoring yourself in the here and now. Sound familiar? Fretting about the future is not helpful. It's not here. Try a breathing exercise. Taking a few deep breaths, for instance, inhaling to the count of 5 and exhaling to the count of 5, will help calm your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, and lower your anxiety. So let us count 5 for the inhale. I would suggest we hold it for 5 and then exhale on 5. And everyone's 5 will be different, a different pace, but it's another way of anchoring our consciousness. Count in 5. Hold for 5. Exhale for 5. For me, the unifying theme of my daughter's sermon, as Recline's book, Why We Are So Polarized, and 8 tips for coping with anxiety, the 8 tips for coping with anxiety, and the British fidelity to the Queen is this: change is hard. It is always hard. We can understand a pandemic. We can understand winning or losing an election. We can understand problems that are difficult to solve and the need to compromise in order to do so. But what we cannot understand, I believe, is when the rules seem to change so drastically that we cannot count on functioning in ways that make sense to us. That is when the ground under our feet seems unsteady, unstable, insecure. And that is when we look desperately for a way to make sense of our reality, our circumstances, and our future. Given all of the debate about the nature and relevance of the monarchy in modern Britain, I find it curious that the outpouring of love and grief for the Queen is so fervent and so passionate. Her years of stalwart duty are irrefutable and laudable. Her devotion to the British people and the British Commonwealth is also absolutely stellar. Her unusually long reign is also remarkable. But what I believe is happening in the streets of London and around the globe is the recognition that in a world of constant change and uncertainty, she was symbolic of constancy and steadfastness, of something that doesn't change, that remains, that endures, that goes on as it has for centuries. The monarchy adapts, certainly. It adjusts and modifies and even changes judiciously. But the institution itself is a symbol of endurance against the forces of change, and even at times against the forces of destruction. One additional thought. That enduring, uninterrupted quality of the monarchy is encapsulated in the declaration, "The Queen is dead, long live the King," which I learned is supposed to be uttered in one breath. We have a similar practice in Judaism. No surprise here, right? When we complete the annual reading of the Torah on Simchat Torah, we are instructed to begin reading it all over again, immediately, without taking even a single breath between the last words of Deuteronomy and the opening words of Genesis. Judaism has long recognized only God as our ruler and sovereign, and the word of God is the Torah and the whole richness and structure of Jewish life, learning, and practice. Even as we adopt any number of coping strategies that are positive and healthy and supportive, we have a gift, an eternal coping strategy that has allowed us to face enormous change and upheaval with a certain sense of perspective, assurance, and equanimity. Let us breathe. The reality of this moment, the reality of our identity as Jews, the reality of our tradition, and of all that is about us this moment in the world. And we might count 5 on the way in and hold it for 5. And release on 5. By way of conclusion, I would share with you Leslie Alderman's remaining tips for coping in the event that you are wondering about them and in the event that you may find them helpful. Think about your victories. Remind yourself of what's working well in your life, whether it's your job, friendships, or the uplifting array of houseplants you nurtured during the pandemic. Be your own therapist. Ask yourself, what do I specifically feel hopeless about and why? Being able to put into words what's getting you down can help you feel less flooded by emotions and better able to process the information rationally. It's what we are taught by Reb Nachman when he goes out into nature and communes with God verbally, speaks out loud to God all of what is in his heart. Take action. Worrying doesn't help one's mental health, but taking action does. Look around your community. When people engage in local issues, they have a renewed sense of optimism. Join forces with a friend. Pick a cause. There are hundreds of nonprofits dedicated to addressing some of the most tenacious challenges on the planet. Donate money to an inspiring organization or volunteer. Paul Slovic offers this advice. Think about what you can do rather than what you can't. So I hope you will continue to breathe. If breathing in to 5 and out but to 5 works for you, continue in that way. And I will look forward to next week, but also to a few of the coming weeks, when we will explore Judaism's coping mechanisms, starting, of course, with the High Holy Days. God bless. Have a good week. Be well.